So the storytelling event that I attended was the Lincoln Lodge. And the Lincoln Lodge is located in Bucktown area of Chicago, kind of that hip area. And so me and my dad went together and we parked on the opposite side of the building because we had to find parking. There was no street parking, but there was a little parking lot that we were able to park at. And so we got into the building. The building had a long hallway going this way, a bar at the end, and then kind of a T hallway that went this way. Well, this hallway continued. So me and my dad turned the corner on this hallway, the one that went here and went towards that way. And there was a line of people in that hallway. So we figured that's where we should go because if there's people, usually that's where you should go. So we waited in the line, waited, got to the front of the line. And once we got to the front of the line, there was a person there standing who had a little pulpit with a sheet of paper. And they asked us our name. We said Adam Yonan. And they saw the name at the last name on the list because Yonan. Scratched it off and they opened the door. Once they opened the door, there was a curtain. So even though the door was open, you couldn't see inside. And out from the curtain came another person. And this person told us, table for two, brought us in, and we sat down. We had seats right at the front. We were lucky. And the inside of this room had old red wallpaper all around it. Minimal lighting, just spotlight on the stage, very small stage. The room was not big at all. It was a very small room. However, I really liked this because it felt kind of like more exclusive, homey, comfy. It just had that vibe to it, kind of like an uplifting vibe, not much of like I'm a number in the audience, kind of like you're really in there. And so once the event started, there was a hostess that came up on the stage and she introduced us saying, "Hey, welcome to the Lincoln Lodge." And once she introduced the Lincoln Lodge and stuff, she started telling us about a couple facts, like the Lincoln Lodge has been the longest independent comedy club, and things like that. So I thought that was really interesting because I never knew that, and especially that Chicago could have a venue like that is amazing. And so once she was up there, she started telling us her own jokes. Even though she wasn't a comedian, she was just a hostess for the event. She started telling jokes, and she had a couple funny lines, which I thought was cool because obviously her job's not a comedian, but she was still able to entertain the crowd. And so after that, she brought up another person that worked for the lodge, and he started going off. And I think he had a couple more funny lines than the hostess. Just personally, that's what I thought. He suited more of my comedy, what I thought was funny. And after he was up there for a while, he introduced the main event, which was Dan Licata. And he came up and had an hour to himself on stage. And Dan Licata did an excellent job speaking. He kind of had this big mustache, shaved his head. He looked really funny. And I think if you look funny, that makes you sound more funny, in turn getting you more laughs. So I think he used his physical appearance to his advantage, as well as multiple different speaking skills. One of which was his body language. His body language was amazing. He would walk up and down the stage using loud sounds like his stamping of his feet, inflection of his voices. He would like talk very like soft, and then he would start to yell like that, which really just drew the crowd in. He used great eye contact, had no notes. He had like a little piece of paper. However, I thought that was notes at the beginning of the show, but it wasn't. He brought people on stage to read a script, so he involved the crowd as well. And that's what the sheet of paper was for. All in all, I think Dan Licata couldn't have done any better. He did an amazing job with his performance, and I had an amazing time at the Lincoln Lodge. The event ended off with Dan Licata just getting off stage and saying, "Thank you, Chicago." The second storytelling event that I attended was New Life Covenant Church, located in Humboldt Park. So me and my mom attended this event, and there was a big parking lot, and we parked and walked in the building. the vibe was amazing. When we walked in the building, there was people welcoming us, shaking our hands, telling us welcome, happy Sunday. We're glad that you're here. So the vibe in the place was amazing. I loved it. And once you walked in, you were not where the stage is or the seats. It was kind of like a common area where there was a cafe and people were just hanging out there. The way to get into the sanctuary, where there was 2 big double doors that you had to walk through on the left side. So we walked through, we grabbed our seats, and after sitting down, the event started with worship. There were people on stage playing instruments, singing, and just leading worship. And they had 2 projectors facing 2 big screens that would show the words so everybody could sing along, so nobody was lost. And so after that happened, I would say there was worship for about 30 minutes, 45 minutes, around there. The pastor came up on stage. And Pastor David, that's his name, started off about talking about how the church needs to kind of not go as much into like worldly things, but kind of stay separate and go away from like the world. So he talked about that, and during his speech, I think that he used great body language. He would walk around the stage, he would talk with his arms like this. He would just be very interactive with the crowd. Not really like calling people out as in like, hey, like, why are you doing that? But just kind of like interacting, saying like we, instead of being like you. He would bring everyone in together, which I think was a good choice from his standpoint, because he was able to kind of make it feel more welcoming, and not as if he was just calling people out, but kind of saying that like we're all in this together. And he did use notes though. He had a laptop on a little like stool / pulpit thing that was in the front, and he would go back, look at his notes every so often. But those were the only notes that he had. I would say he was prepared though. He wasn't relying on his notes too much, because he did have slides that would go along with what he was saying. And he did know his slides before they would come up. So when he's talking about a topic, before he transitions into the next thing, he would kind of say something that would hint, and he would change the screen, and it would be right there. So he wouldn't be totally lost if he didn't have notes, but I think the notes did help him. The next thing is tone of voice. So in his tone of voice, he used kind of various like degrees of inflection. He didn't really speak very softly at all. A lot of it was very kind of loud, because that's just the way that he talks. He does have kind of a louder, deeper voice. However, when he did hit points that he did want you to remember, he would kind of not yell, but just speak a little bit louder into the microphone, or pull the microphone a little bit closer. Now, the type of speaking that he used was, I wouldn't say persuasive, but kind of something of that style, kind of just telling people that they need to change. So I guess I would put it in the persuasive category, but it didn't come off as persuasive when I was listening to it. What he could have done different, I would say the laptop with the notes is something that he could have changed. I think that it was kind of distracting from the whole event, and that if he didn't have it, it would just help him a lot more, because he would always walk back and forth and come back to the laptop, and he would do it in a way that it was noticeable to me. But I think if he got rid of the laptop and kind of just memorized all of his parts, it would just better it. However, it wasn't too much of a distraction, but I think it would have just been better without it. And the event ended by the pastor praying everyone off in something called the benediction. And after he prayed the benediction, he said, everybody is dismissed. And that's how the event ended. Thank you. The third and final storytelling event that I attended was the Laugh Factory, located in East Lakeview. So the Laugh Factory is a great venue, in my opinion. You get in there, it's kind of hard to find street parking, but it's manageable. You find your street parking, get into the event. There's a waiting room where everybody's in line and someone takes you from the line to the big stage. And so I went with my dad. So me and my dad sat kind of at the side because that's where the guy took us to. You don't really get to choose your seats. And so when the event started, there was a hostess that came up and she introduced everyone, kind of made everyone feel welcome by talking about who's been here for the first time, who's been here many times, who's traveled the farthest away. And one lady actually traveled all the way from Belgium to visit a relative and came to the Laugh Factory, which I thought was kind of cool because it kind of shows that she would take her time from a foreign country to come to this comedy club. And so after she introduced everyone, asked the whole crowd a bunch of questions, they went on to the first comedian. And now, before I talk about the first comedian, my commentary on the hostess is she did an amazing job. She had no notes. She really interacted with the crowd. The way that she talked was not that where it was kind of just off-putting, but it really like drew everyone in and was able to keep their attention. Didn't really sound like your typical like, oh, hey guys, how are you doing? And she made it feel very personal, which I thought was a great job of her. And so she went on to tell a couple jokes and then introduce the first comedian. The first comedian, his body language was just way too out of control. I feel like he overdid it to the point where it was distracting. And that critique, and I feel like he wasn't prepared. Sometimes he would kind of blank, but he wasn't horrible. However, he could have done better on those two things because just the body movement was very off-putting for me and distracting. So after the first comedian, the second comedian was introduced by him. And so the second comedian, which was my favorite, who aligned with my sense of humor, but that's not why they were my favorite. I would say they were my favorite because of the way that they performed. So he kind of used his awkwardness to his advantage because that's kind of how his humor was going towards, kind of saying how he was an awkward guy. So he would kind of walk around the stage very awkwardly. His dress, the way that he dressed was very awkward. And I really love that about him, that he really took it to the extreme where he dressed awkward, walked around the stage awkward, and made his presence awkward, but in a way that was funny. He had no notes, used his body. His tone of voice was amazing, the way that he used it. His storytelling, when he told stories in his jokes, was like one of the best I've ever heard. It really just drew me in and had me paying attention to every word he was saying. So now the third comedian after him was a woman, and I think she did a pretty good job. However, I think she wasn't prepared. A lot of the time she would start to like go, or she would forget what she was gonna say, or she would stand there and just think about the next joke she would say. And I think if she changed that up, she would have been great. She had a couple funny lines. However, I think she could have really improved on that. Now the fourth comedian was a man, and this is the final one. So he was really good. Not as good as the second guy. He had his flaws, which I would say were his preparedness. He wasn't horrible. However, you could tell sometimes he would kind of be thinking of a joke. He wouldn't really have it right off the cuff like the other guy. He would tell a joke and then stand there for maybe a minute or two. I would say a minute actually, and just think of what he's gonna say next. Other than that, he used his body language excellently. Tone of voice was amazing. I would say most everything was working for him except just his preparedness. And after all of that, he got off the stage and the hostess came back on and said, all right, that's the show. Thank you guys for coming. And that's how it ended. And after it ended, everybody just sat there, waited for their bill for whatever food or drinks they ordered, and then went home. Thank you. Now for my final video, I'll be talking about the public speaking class. So a couple things that stood out to me that I liked about the public speaking class was, number one, the interaction between the teacher and the students, and the whole classroom environment. I loved it. I really felt welcomed. The first day I walked in there, just a great atmosphere of music playing, the screen up there, everybody's names up there, and I just love how Nikki kind of brought us all together. And even with the beginning, with the whole phone thing, at first I kind of was like reluctant to. I was like, oh, this is some like BS. However, I really felt like it brought the whole class together, and made us really like get to know each other on a personal level, helped us more pay attention to each other whenever we were speaking about something. I also loved the speaking activities that we did, talking about like random topics, singing random songs. One thing that really like stood out to me that I remember right now is when we had to sing the songs and you brought us the sunglasses, the scarves, and all the goofy costumes, and I just like really enjoyed that day. I think that whole idea of having us do that really honestly helped my public speaking skills, although it might not have felt like that in the moment. I felt like it did help me in the long run, like really get to have my body movement flowing while doing that, but also do it in a way that's like easy and not like very robotic, because singing and dancing is something we all do. Another thing that I really liked about the class was the teacher, Nikki. She's like not a normal teacher that you would find just sits behind the desk and just like tells everyone what to do, like go do this assignment, go do that. She like gets out there, like gets in our face, kind of tells us like, all right, this is what you're gonna do, you got this, I'm willing to help you guys out, which was really like crazy to me because I've never seen that in a classroom setting before. And just I think like the impact she made on me in terms of like getting to class on time and other things like that, it's something that I'll take with me like even when I leave the class, because she really showed me how different components of public speaking and other things we talked about in class really can translate into the real world and help us. And so Nikki's made like a really big impact on me, not just in my public speaking skills, but on the way that I'll just carry myself when I leave the class, because she has a wealth of knowledge that I was just able to take from. Now, another thing that I would talk about is things that we could change in the class. Now, this one, like, I had to think about for a long time, because in reality, I would say there's nothing we should change about this class. This class was amazing. I would not change a single thing about it, because I just don't see a thing that we could change. The classroom environment was perfect. The assignments outside of class were perfect. The movies that we had to watch and stuff. I really feel like those movies and stuff did help us in class. It wasn't just like a useless thing. It did kind of help us, especially the one movie, The King's Speech. That really helped me out in seeing that someone that had like a really, really hard time speaking was able to overcome that and become a great speaker in England. And the final thing that I would like to cover is the confidence that this has brought me. At first, I was pretty bad at public speaking, never really practiced or did anything to help me. However, with Nikki's help, I was able to gain confidence in myself by not just practicing my speeches and getting better throughout the course of the semester, but also in gaining confidence in myself that maybe not just in public speaking, but in something else, I could further myself and get better and not just hit a brick wall and be like, well, that's the end of it, and see how just failing and trying and persevering really does pay off in the long run. So I'd like to thank you for everything, Nikki, and have a great holiday.